Conservation Commission on June 8th. This is a special meeting having moved our meeting from the third Thursday to the second Thursday just for this month. Back to the third Thursday next month, and in August, I believe, we're on vacation month. We're not scheduling it, so just a little forewarning on that. Doesn't look like we have public comment tonight. Did we receive any? So we'll just jump right into jumping worms. And just a little bit of a debrief to see what we learned, and we might want to
I thought it went quite well. What did you think?
It was really interesting.
I brought the
We
handout.
had a pretty good turnout,
Like 30 people maybe?
I would say, yeah. And
It's
I
recorded.
could have listened to her all night. Like, it was very, wasn't as doom and gloom as some of the information that I've received on it thus far. It felt like, okay, well, this is what's happening, and it is, obviously a concern, but it doesn't seem like there's much that we can do about it yet.
It is tricky to resolve, to mitigate. So the best idea is to prevent it from getting into your yard. So these worms are not indigenous. They were brought here, they think, 100 years ago, but in the Hurricane Sandy, where they mulched a lot of stuff, they then spread that mulch all over the tri-state area, and it may have had, she implied that it may have had jumping worms, or that would be one of the ways that it would get there, where you put mulch everywhere. And then it started spreading much more rapidly, and in the past 5 years, they've been noticing them in lots more places. And especially, it sounds like it's dangerous for woodlands, because that whole first few layers of leaf duff no longer has any nutrition, and so the plants that usually grow there can't grow, and and when worms are there, they change the consistency of the soil, so roots can't get as secure a hold. And then, the animals that feed off them have a harder time, and leaves more space for invasive species, other plant invasive species. So it is a concern, and it seems like she did not think the boot brushes did very much, though.
Okay, that's good information for us.
And,
Consider
right.
applying those as a preventative. There are other reasons to deploy boot brushes, but good to know.
Yeah, that was your sense. She even said something like that.
With respect to the mulch that the town, gives out to people, that lets people take the wood chips, does anybody look at that, or is there any way to treat that so
This
that
is
that
all
would?
kind of a new phenomena, so that would be worth wondering and
Mhm.
asking the town if they do. The problem is
I
it's
don't
in the.
think it wasn't the mulch in the mulch per se. I think it helped. So they clone each other. So it was almost like what the mulch, or the lack of, because it wiped out so many trees, and what that mulch I think, kind of created a very warm environment to home these guys.
And they're in the larval stage, so you can't really see them for a lot of their life stuff.
Suspect that
It wasn't like it was
mulch-
contaminated mulch. It wasn't like the worms were in the mulch per se. It was just that what happened was kind of a big event that knocked so many trees down and created a situation that was a very hospitable environment for them.
I recommend people look at it. It was recorded, and it's just an hour or even just 45 minutes long, so it's worth getting informed. So anyone who's concerned could get some good information.
We, a couple things, just start with the latest on the video. We did get the link for the video, and I have it, I'll send out to all of you. I haven't done that yet, so I'll get that out to everybody. And I
Who
think,
might have something to say about this?
You guys gotta speak into the microphones.
not,
It is not.
thank you. That will help. So I was saying, just for the record, that I will get the link to everyone. Pua had sent it to me, so I have
And
it.
it's going to be on the town site for town.
Yes, it's not Listed the same way our meetings are, from what I've seen. I have to go back and check that again before I send it out. It's the thing I wanted to do. I think you have to go to a slightly different place in the site, but I'll check that and let you know. And the second thing on the mulch, my impression was that mulch piles make a very nice home for
Exactly.
jumping worms, so that if you do have a in common mulch pile, such as the town mulch pile, and that gets infected, then you're essentially spreading it because you're
Sure,
lots
giving
of
it to
different-
everybody.
You're giving it to everybody. So I think that's concerned. I had gotten, good point on your part, Paul. Kathy Wick from the Garden Club had contacted me and asked if anybody had thought about that. And I've sent her back a couple questions because the Garden Club apparently has had some experience with the town mulch pile previously. I'm just trying to get a little, some background from her, and then we'll.
Is there any way
talk
to
about
treat the mulch so that
Heat it up. They
Heat-
don't like heat.
Oh, okay.
So that's
Maybe
best-
put a tarp
So-
over it, would that be enough to?
Absolutely. If you got
Sun.
anything from, the mulch pile, or even what you get at garden centers, because there's no guarantees that they're not going to be have any issues, is that you just kind of leave it out in its bag, in the sun for a little bit, or you can tarp it and cook it for a little bit, and that will kill them.
So, I didn't actually mean this to be
Okay.
an update on the jumping worms themselves. It's on the video, hopefully, but I
But
appreciate
it was a
hearing about it.
successful, it was successful and people enjoyed it and
Good.
it was
The-
easy to do. and
The venue was appropriate. Would
Yep.
we do anything different in terms of our logistics or
We served some food.
or
people seemed to
advertisement,
like
or
that. No, I think it was,
we're good? Okay,
couldn't
just wanted
have,
to check.
more
And
people
we're-
would have been hard to accommodate.
Worth doing again,
If
there
there's
is,
a topic that's important, yeah.
so there's another identified speaker we can probably, have different, set of thoughts and from a different viewpoint perhaps. Okay, good. Thank you,
Certainly.
and Diana and Barbara in absentia. That's, I think, I'd like to see us do similar things as topics present themselves we think are appropriate. I think it's worthwhile
I
reach the community.
volunteered a gift certificate for her for doing it, and maybe in the future we can institute that as a possibility for.
Yeah. Okay.
So
Yeah. Okay.
maybe you should even write her a note and thank her as chairman.
Okay. We have some contact information.
Yeah. maybe.
I'll do that. That's a great idea. Thank you. Okay. The next item was pollinator pathways. And I know you probably both have something to say on the topic, so start with either one.
Sure. I'll tell you what I found out so far. I had a meeting scheduled with the person from NRCS. He kind of stood me up, so I'm trying to get a hold of her again this week to have a phone conversation for her. But what she was able to tell me in my first discussion with her was that they do have funds available for pollinator grants. She described how the grants work. Basically, the grants would pay for 50% of the plant material. The other 50% would have to be paid by the group receiving the grant. That's for the plant material. The labor would have to be provided by the group receiving the grant. And so, like we had started to talk about last month a bit, it would be great to see if we could get the Boy Scouts or maybe even Joy's 4-H group or what have you involved in that if we're successful in getting a grant. I spoke to Steve Muno from Musaro Farm several weeks ago now, and he indicated that's how their grants worked also, that it paid for 50% of the plant material. They were responsible for the other half of it, and they were also responsible for doing the planting of it. The person that I've been speaking with at NRCS is located in Hamden, and I will be able to connect with her before the next meeting again to see if we can get some more details on how we pursue a grant, if that's what we're going to do.
And Paul, are those grants, I imagine you have to apply with a project in mind?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. So either you have to own the property or lease the property. So, since the town owns the property we're talking about, that would qualify. Yes.
Which property are we talking about?
Well, the discussion came up about the Audubon study, and they had recommended that some improvements to the property for pollinator pathways. That was one of there was a section on improvements that they had suggested, that's how the discussion got started about pollinator pathways and grants for pollinator pathways. I mean, certainly we could think of other locations within town that would make sense too, but that's what started our discussion was the former country club property. There was an Audubon study done on the property, and one of the things that they mentioned in terms of improvements that could be made to improve the habitat for birds would be some improvement in the pollinator areas in terms of along the edges of the open space.
Okay. Other questions for Paul on that aspect of it?
I think it's a plan we need to flesh out a lot more, because gardens take maintenance. And I almost think maybe doing something at Beecher School as a starter thing, or, someplace else where people can attend to it and where there's water. Because once you plant them, you can't really expect them to not take any tending.
I'm not sure what the vegetation would be that, would be best for it. So I don't know whether it's something that we can plant and hope that 80% of it, lives, or if it's something that has to require a lot of maintenance.
It all requires maintenance.
Required till it
Yeah.
gets established.
Exactly. So it's native plants that you're using, but we have such an invasive species problem too, that if you planted something just willy-nilly and you didn't have a plan, it would just get choked out too. That's the other issue we're dealing with.
Also,
which is-
watering.
It's a segue into what I was gonna
Yes, it is.
say, but, what is a pollinator pathway? It's a public and private pesticide-free corridor with native plants to provide nutrition and habitat for pollinating insects and birds. Even the smallest spaces, flower boxes, container gardens, and curb strips can play important parts of a pathway. So currently, community pollinator pathway projects are organized by volunteers from town conservation organizations who work together to establish pollinator-friendly habitats and food sources for bees, butterflies, hummingbirds, and other pollinating insects and wildlife along a series of continuous corridors. Most native bees have a range of about 750 meters, so the goal is to connect properties that are no farther apart than that. So I'll talk about a couple of pollinator pathways that already exist here in town on public spaces. We know the community garden is one. Beecher is, and we're doing more work on that as well. Macero has one. Many of our yards do, but the pollinator pathway project specifically in Woodbridge is Woodbridge is now official on the pollinator pathway. In April of 2022, our Amity 4-H presented to the Board of Selectmen, and they voted to proclaim Woodbridge's commitment to be part of the pollinator pathway. This was their Court of Honor county fair project last year, where they won their ribbon, and this is the proclamation that Beth signed on Earth Day, proclaiming our commitment as a town. So this is a part of a larger grassroots movement creating a pollinator-friendly corridor made up of municipal, private, and commercial spaces. The Garden Club of Woodbridge, the Woodbridge Land Trust, Amity 4-H, Macero Community Farm, and Beecher Road School have joined forces to establish pollinator-friendly habitats all over town. Our mission is to educate and spread the word to our community, the importance of avoiding pesticides, controlling invasive plants, and planting and conserving native plants that are favorable to pollinators. As more public and private properties join the effort, quality habitats will be created, allowing pollinators to proliferate. So I have some, this is kind of a part of a bigger presentation, but like how, you can participate in the pollinator pathway in Woodbridge, things like rethinking your lawn, avoiding pesticides, planting native shrubs, trees, and perennials, removing invasive plants, which there's a long, long list here in Woodbridge. You're very familiar with that, with the trails and everything. And then just getting people to add their property to the map, and they can even order yard signs to signify that their property is in fact on the pollinator pathway. Our 4-Hers have just created a Facebook group. Right now, questions are going to the Woodbridge Land Trust, to Kathy Wick, because she's been doing some work spearheading some of this stuff. But here in Woodbridge, some recent pollinator pathway happenings. Beecher Road School just planted 8 gardens. Most of the plants and supplies were donated by local individuals, garden stores, and landscape companies. And with the help of Master Gardener interns, our Amity 4-H, BRS PTO, Green Team, and parent volunteers, they all did this huge project for this year's Arts Week. Our Amity 4-H will be doing public outreach at Macero Farms this summer, July 25th and 28th from 2:30 to 6:30 as part of Macero's open farm days during the CSA pickup days. They're going to be presenting this year's 4-H club project on the pollinator pathway that they're going to be submitting at the New Haven County Fair. They're also going to be doing a pollinator pathway farm tour and scavenger hunt for all ages. And as the bigger project, I think, where we can be real leaders, especially if we're talking about getting grants and everything moving forward, is that because this is in really the early stages for Woodbridge, we really need to figure out a way to get everyone to work together. Many hands make light work. At a minimum, this should include combining efforts and resources for a unified mission, which I don't think we have exactly yet. But with the following, we could do this with Woodbridge Land Trust, the Garden Club of Woodbridge, Woodbridge Community Gardens, Macero Community Farm, other farms in Woodbridge, Agricultural Commission, Amity Board of Ed, Woodbridge Board of Ed, Commission on Use, CUPOP, Conservation, Inlands Wetlands. I mean, I just have this huge long list of everyone that we really kind of gotta get everyone in on it, on the same page, and then, maybe we have a time where we kind of identify a list. I mean, things like the 4-Hers are doing their thing, but no one knows about it. We just need to figure out how to not be so siloed and get a common goal, and break it down. Things like just even the capped landfill over on Acorn Hill is a meadow waiting to happen, and we just need to get seeds over there, and that'll be another beautiful thing. But these efforts, whatever we decide to do as a town, will allow us to gain grant funding opportunities in the future, and big ones at that. We could really shine as a town and be added to the garden tours that are held throughout the state and really the whole Northeast pollinator pathway, and really showcase, how beautiful Woodbridge is, because we're kind of halfway doing it, but, it wouldn't take a lot of effort to get us doing it on a bigger level. Also the other towns have been doing, I kind of have some examples, and I'm happy to send this to you all if you wanted to click on the links or whatever. But other towns are doing wonderful things and have municipal ordinances, regulations, and policies that help the pollinator pathway efforts. Things like dark skies in Branford, we're already doing that here in Woodbridge, where we don't have a lot of street lights in Woodbridge, but they've kind of done these certain ordinances and proclaiming, certain spaces to be dark, because that is a real issue for pollinators. Native plants, the town of Newtown has a whole native plant policy for municipal properties, where they have a requirement that all new plantings of trees, shrubs, and other plants on the properties need to be native plants, and there's a specific list that they go through. So any fallen trees in a storm or disease, redevelopment, expansion, have to be 100% native. They also have, like in the town of Ridgefield, they're doing things like that as well. Wilton is, pesticides, Norwalk has a whole pesticide ordinance, and Woodbridge, in our initial proclamation, it did say that, that they were also going to do that, whereas native bees, where did she say that?
There is,
She wanted to do something in terms of the pesticides as well, but I don't see it really spelled out as it was a reduced application of herbicides and pesticides. So there could be some work on here, as we kind of flesh that out a little bit more.
there is something on the books already. I'm not
Like they
familiar
weren't
with the
going to
details.
use it at the schools. I feel like there is something.
I thought it was town properties applied to, but
Mhm.
I'm not good on the details there.
So like I said, we're on our way, very well on our way to doing all the right things, but I think we just need to get more cohesiveness with all of the different players in town.
Okay. And if you, just as a side note, on the dark skies, I think you talked about that in terms of Brantford. If you have knowledge of, where that, I can find that information of what Brantford did, I
Yeah.
would take that.
There's a link, so I'll send you what I've
Okay.
typed up, because
Great.
I'm gonna be doing this thing with our 4-Hers. This is some research that they've been doing, so, but I'll send you all the links so that you can click on, what some of these other towns are doing,
Great.
like Dark Skies.
So, Joy partially answered, I think, the question that I had when I heard that you wanted to add some time on tonight's agenda to discuss this in more detail, which was what role should the Conservation Commission play for pollinator pathways? Because it appeared to me that there were initiatives by a few different organizations, and then I guess tangentially there's more organizations involved that Joy listed. So, what's the role we should play? I think we need to come to clarity on that. And I hear you say, I think I hear you saying that the efforts are starting, but they're just not all necessarily pulling in the same direction. They're independent.
They are
efforts.
very independent, and it can feel a little bit like they're stepping on toes and things that, or tripping on the,
Well, that was my exact concern with
Yeah.
saying, we should do a pollinator pathway. Well, are we starting to step on toes by doing something that somebody thinks they're already taking the initiative forward on behalf of the town?
right, but I think that Conservation Commission is probably a natural leader in that, because we're supposed to be, making recommendations to the town, whether
Mhm.
that's zoning or the
Mhm.
Board of Selectmen, on what, how to conserve. I don't think it's, you know, I think I look at it as it's sort of the greenway for pollinators,
Yeah,
you know?
right.
And
Well, I think the greenway should be partially, it's coming out wrong, but pollinators hopefully will use the greenway.
Right.
Now
Yeah.
you can
So-
encourage that by
milkweed
enhancing some of the
and-
plantings
right, exactly.
along the greenway, but the greenway by itself, as much as there's native and it's not invaded by all invasives, should be a natural place for pollinators.
My thought is we could initiate it in terms of spearheading, trying to find grants and such, and then coordinate with other groups that would actually be the people that would plant them and, the ongoing effort. But if we were the group to help get it started, it would probably be a big help.
Okay, and I heard, so we, on behalf of the town, we do the grant, we could help with grants, and we have the connection with the town, so we could try to act as sponsor for the grants. And sometime, you'll find out as you talk to this person, does it, who's better situated to get the grants? Is it private organizations or is it municipalities? You can ask that question, if it helps to have a municipality behind the grants as well. And then I heard,
I can ask those questions.
yeah, I heard possibly as a policy role, you were suggesting that our role is to make recommendations to the Board of Selectmen, so maybe we work with the different parties.
Mhm.
It's one to find out what would help them in their goals, their projects, and maybe those are the things that we can bundle into recommendations for policies that would help them.
Well, depending on how enthusiastic the selectmen are or the public works are, we could identify public spaces that could, when being renovated, could be, or maintained, could introduce some native plants too. I mean, even the triangle by the firehouse, could have a few native shrubs.
Yeah, and if we could deal with just that section of Center Road, I mean, they planted all those beautiful trees and they're all getting choked out by the invasive,
What beautiful
Stuff.
trees.
right in front of the cornfield.
They're doing well.
But on the side that faces the street, you can see there's just like tons of stuff that's like,
Well,
you
yeah.
can't even see them, right?
The trees are doing fine, but that spaces.
I'll just throw in, Joy, because you had mentioned that to me, that when I came back today, they were mowing all that wild.
Oh, good.
growth.
Well, that's one of the only things you can do is get it, mow it down, like,
Well, in there are native species too that are getting
no,
mowed
it's
down.
all getting,
But
it's a big job.
I lost my thought.
But maybe we can brainstorm this at another time now that we're thinking that it's of interest and we're just not sure of how's the best way to do it. It sounds
Yeah.
like this year we're kind of,
but-
all those native plants would have needed to be planted.
Yes. So
Ye-
we've missed the
yes.
boat on that,
Yeah, sure.
but, but.
There's a fall season as well.
There is, but I think that if we could spend the rest of the year, like, coming up with a plan, and then really, in January, if there was a real idea of like, what are we going to do, a project per se, that we could get, because part of it too is the volunteer, that takes some time to line up, right? Like if we were gonna get the Boy Scouts or the Girl Scouts or all of them, and 4-H, I mean, some of these jobs are pretty big.
I guess I'm, as a person who already tends lots of gardens, would be reluctant. I think the idea of getting the funding and not managing the enactment, I think that could really make us a full-time job, and there might be other things that we should also be focusing on. But if we can figure out how to help get funding or do funding or identify areas or see if Public Works is interested, I think that would
Yeah.
be more how I would think
I
of it
think
rather
that
than
that's the
us being
thing.
the engine.
We need to, I think what I was suggesting is the mission of the town, as far as the pollinator pathway is concerned, needs to be fleshed out. And that way you can know what is it that we're doing and think it through, A to Z. How is that gonna be, maintained once it's been established? You don't wanna just go get money and just go get plants and then not have the follow through, right? I completely agree with that 100%.
Yeah.
So things like, for instance, the Garden Club of Woodbridge, like Noreen and I are Master Gardener interns right now, like this is our passion. And we're going to, for sure, continue to maintain, for instance, we just had these beecher gardens installed. We're gonna make sure that those are kept up. And as you know, with Master Gardener hours, part of it is your community service, you're required to
Right.
give that time of yourself, every year. But, so there are things we can do, but we need to, so like other towns, for instance, have their projects and Master Gardener interns will go and just continually work on these things year after year after year. So there's other,
And the town owns the
In-
project?
yes, so like towns, so for instance, up in Bethel, they have something, Milford has a ton of stuff, and it's all volunteer, but it's mostly coordinated through the Connecticut, Yukon's Master Gardener program. So they rely on all of their interns to go through and
And
do their service hours.
Who administrates it? Let's take Milford, you mentioned. Who administrates it out of the town?
It depends on what the program is, but like Cheryl Capaldi is one of the Master Gardener mentors in the Yukon Master Gardener program, and so there's a plant clinic she runs every Wednesday on the green. There's a farmer's market that runs throughout the season, and they just constantly advertise. It's very well organized actually for Master Gardener interns or mentors to come. So there's always, they just put they're very organized about how they list sort of the job postings and people come. But we have a very healthy garden club here in Woodbridge, and it's growing.
Yeah.
And I think that we would have some people that would really get behind something like this, but it has to be a coordinated effort.
Right.
We probably need people from multiple groups, but I thought it would be nice to have some of the youth get involved in it.
For sure.
And be the primary focus of trying to get young people involved in doing it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
You know,
but
I
it
do-
still needs adult supervision and,
Right.
yeah.
Thank you for bringing this to our attention more in depth.
way that you have.
Thank you.
And 'cause I was not fully aware of all that entailed. And I also believe that we should be doing this in tandem with another, perhaps, organization. And maybe you can help lead us with what we can, what impact we can do, this organization, this committee.
I mean, if you wanted to have another few discussions so that we could kind of figure this out, but I would be happy to go to, the Board of Selectmen or whoever we need to sort of figure out how we make this a town initiative, and I don't know, like like what you're saying, I think that there should be, I don't know if you need to form almost not a ad hoc committee, not necessarily, but like where you're gonna, they have like a green team or whatever, but like that they would have a town initiative, and there would be multiple people from different places, including those youth organizations we're talking about, to try to come up with a goal for the town for our pollinator pathway. And then we go after the money, once we've figured out who and what and how, we
I
can,
think some of those things we could do in parallel, because we can get everybody lined up and we have no money doesn't go very far.
It does not, and we look
Okay.
kinda silly, and then we don't look, we're not gonna be people that get more money after that, cause
We're,
I think we should move on and sort of
yeah.
talk about this and think about it.
I was about to try to end up in that place. I would like to ask one more clarifying question so we can all think about it. And it's just back to the sort of the coordination role between the entities and they're not coordinated at all. Beach, Garden Club has no knowledge of what Beach Road is doing, et cetera, and 4-H, just separate spheres.
absolutely, but it doesn't have to stay that way.
No,
Once
no,
upon
I
a
mean,
time, the Garden Club of Woodbridge, for instance, had a sort of junior
Okay.
group, young young gardeners as well. So, there are things we can do, and I think we're going to do, quite honestly, whether it's through my role here or any of the hats that I wear, I'm gonna get it done. So.
But none of those groups are thinking, well, they're at the vanguard of pollinator pathways for the town, and everybody.
Well, that's why I think it has to become a Board of Selectmen thing where, they need to decide, you've proclaimed this, so
Yep.
now what? Here's some recommendations from some people that are already doing work within the pollinator pathway,
Okay.
and that we just need to get them to sort of get behind it so that we can go after this money, because I don't even think we can go get a grant, can we? Without the Board of Selectmen saying, yes, you can go and do that, or?
No, we couldn't. We as a Conservation Commission couldn't.
They'd have to
Work
approve
through
us
the
going
town.
for the grant.
But I imagine the Garden Club could. Beecher Road School, probably not. I don't know for sure.
Well,
4-H
the
club could.
school, so they could, there's, the NRCS is not the only place. I
Sure.
mean, you can get, right now, pollinator pathway is such a hot topic that
Yep.
you can get them from so many different places, right? And so there are educational grants, there are youth grants and everything. But, like I said, I think it's endless, the amount of grants we could get if we were coordinated and we do it the
Mhm.
right way.
Okay. Is a copy of the proclamation available in text that's electronic?
I'm sure that it's on the town's website, but I'll look that up and send it all to
Maybe the
you.
minutes of that meeting.
Huh?
Maybe the minutes of the Board of Selectmen meeting where
Where
the 4-H
the
came.
kids did their
Yeah.
presentation?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
It might be, I don't, should
It
be
was
able to-
April of 2022. Sorry, they did their presentation in March of 2022, and then the proclamation happened at the Earth Day event in 2022.
Okay. Jerry Sherrill should have a copy of it. Probably
Mhm.
the date helps. Okay. Thank you, Joy, for that,
Sure.
and the good discussion, and take note of your comments, because I think we do have to be careful of trying to do projects themselves with hands-on. Helping and sponsoring and policy is good, but we'll further think it through that. Okay. The Audubon Society Habitat Assessment,
What about the tree preservation?
oh, did I skip one? I think on the final agenda I switched the order.
Oh, okay, sorry.
You're right. I think I switched it, but I thought I made all the changes to my draft agenda, but I didn't, so to go, in order, the tree preservation.
So the working group met this week. We reviewed the Brantford regulation or tree ordinance, which is quite extensive. We discussed different elements that we thought were useful. We don't want to propose something that's as involved or complex as what Brantford did, but we're looking at different elements of the Brantford regulation, which is, again, as I said, we seemed like there was some thought put into it. And we were identifying areas that we thought were worth having in ours that would be applicable for Woodbridge. Beyond that, Diana was going to be working with getting access to the town's subscription to a survey website, and she was exploring doing a survey to see what sort of things people thought should be included in a tree ordinance. That was the discussion we had this week.
Okay, and who is she talking to?
So Chris Sullivan told us that the town had a subscription to Zoho. It's
Yeah.
called Zoho. And she was going to be reaching out to Tony. I think Tony Genovese was the keeper of that subscription. So she was going to talk to him and figure out how we could get access to it. So we might be able to put together a survey to ask people what things they thought were important for a tree ordinance.
Okay, all right, we'll have to run it back by the town. Okay. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt your flow there.
So
Anything
that
else?
was the gist of it. Some of the things we liked about the Brantford tree ordinance was they identified, they had a definition section that we kind of liked in terms of things that they had identified in their ordinance, like significant trees. We talked about protecting significant trees.
Mhm.
We talked about some of the other ordinances that we had seen from other towns within Connecticut and New York in terms of what elements they had in their tree ordinances. Our goal would be to have something that wasn't burdensome for either the town to enforce or for people to, for homeowners either. So we're trying to be thoughtful in terms of what we suggest, and so again, that's why we were looking at potentially doing a survey too.
Okay. If we're gonna do a survey, is that gonna be at the stage of you're starting to draft the survey?
We just talked about doing the survey.
Okay.
So Diana was going to see how she could get access to the subscription to be able to do it. So it's in the early stages.
All right. And so it still sounds like this is a chunk away from being ready to bring back to the commission as a whole.
Right. So what we're trying to do is trying to avoid what, we talked about a couple months ago about different elements we liked in other towns, tree ordinances, and I think some people were critical in terms of what we were talking about. We were just kind of brainstorming, so we want to take it a little bit slower to make sure that what we do suggest there is some interest in.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, that was within within the town itself, not the townspeople, but
Just comments from people.
Oh, yeah, okay.
like
townspeople.
Yeah, so
also? Okay.
Chris Sullivan had some comments on what
Yeah.
we were talked about,
Yeah.
and
From
from
an enforcement point of view.
right. We had talked about looking at something like what Westport did, which was a 25-foot perimeter around
Yeah.
the property line as being an area where people wouldn't cut down trees, and we thought that was kind of interesting, but
Yeah.
that was just one town, and I think
Okay.
we want to be thoughtful what we
Alright.
propose.
Okay. All right. And any thought so far about the form of what you're going to bring forward? What you're going to be bringing forward, an outline of what
An
this
outline of what it would be, and then
what
we
would
would
be.
sit down with somebody who would draft it. Maybe that would be the ordinance committee.
Well,
But
Yeah.
no,
that-
met with Chris Sullivan
right.
last month, and our intention would be to work with her in terms of what our ideas were.
Okay. The and always good to get her input because she'll have a good
A vo-
perspective from, just from the history in the town and also from the enforcement of ordinances and what's practical. At one time, there was talk about, these are my words, that should this be an ordinance? Should this be in zoning regulations?
So the other towns we've looked at have had it in their zoning regulations. So it seems like that's a logical place for it. Especially if somebody's going to be developing a lot,
Yep.
it's the right place for it. If it's a subdivision, it's the right place for it. So it seems like it's kind of a logical place to have it.
Okay. I'll just, as you think about the format, the outline's the outline. It's what you're bringing to the commission, so we can express our recommendation of what, we would like to recommend to the Board of Selectmen. I just remind you of David Lober's advice, which I think is still good, that give the Board of Selectmen what it is that you'd like to accomplish. Let either the ordinance committee or planning and zoning write the regulations.
Right,
We
yeah.
don't,
Yeah,
we
we're
don't
not
need
gonna-
to be experts at
We're not going to
how
wordsmith
to
it.
write, write that up.
Yeah, we want to
Yeah.
provide the concept.
Okay. All right. Any questions for Paul?
Sounds like a work in progress.
Yeah,
It is.
sounds like it's
Yep.
started to go down the path. Okay, great. So now that I'm back on track, and I guess I'm going to turn back to you, Paul. Maybe to kick off, if you would, the Audubon discussion. And hopefully everybody's had a chance to read this at this point.
I know there was an event last Saturday where there were a bunch of birders out. I don't know if did you go to it, Tim?
No, I couldn't.
I was
Still
busy that
not.
day, unfortunately too. But there was an event where there was some knowledgeable birders that took people around the former country club property, pointing out the different species and such.
It was on National Trails Day, I think they did. Land Trust sponsored it.
Land Trust and Parks Association.
Park Association, that's right.
Yeah.
And
That's
I
a
wish
good
I
idea.
could have gone there from a birder's point of view. I think that would have been interesting. They had local people, local experts, or the expert, do you know?
I don't know who the expert was. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to attend.
Yeah. Okay. But we were going to talk about the assessment from the Audubon Society, and I think we asked people to read it. And were there specific parts of this that you wanted to highlight? Recommendations that you wanted
I thought
to bring?
the section where they talked about areas for improvement were interesting. That's kind of what sparked my interest in exploring the pollinator pathway grants.
Okay. Was that the only recommendation of note that people saw?
There was a whole section of recommendations, but I think that was one of the major recommendations.
Yeah. The other
I
one that
mean, you have it in front of you. I don't know
yeah,
what the other ones were.
and I can hit a couple of these. A lot of them were pretty general. Learn more about invasive plants and develop a plan for monitoring and control. But what I thought was interesting is where they talked about, and I don't know if it's on this page that I have open or not. They talked about succession growth and how to manage that so that not everything grows to the same height
Right.
all over, and that you sort of cascade it out from the meadows out into the woods, but that you have transition zones. And
I think that's what they were talking about, where to plant the pollinators were along the edges.
Yeah, probably the edge of the meadows.
Right.
And then, well, I thought that was a doable, worthwhile doable type of activity, that doesn't take a lot of effort to focus your mowing in such a way to accomplish that. But it would still need effort to come to those recommendations, probably with expertise we don't have here. I mean, they talked about getting a forester in. So I didn't know if that was some of what you had wanted to bring forth to the commission.
I don't think I asked to have it
Yeah.
on the agenda this time, did I?
It
Specifically.
came out of the last meeting that we were gonna talk
Oh, we were gonna talk about it, right?
talk about this, and since
Again, as I mentioned, the thing that struck me was the pollinator pathways,
and maybe
and then I knew that Massaro Farm had done that, and so I
Okay.
thought, kind of made that connection and thought maybe that's something that we could help along too.
yeah, okay, all right, so we'll incorporate that in.
I thought it was interesting, just the wide variety of birds.
Wildlife that's there.
Yeah, exactly,
Yeah.
that it's on the property and that there are birds that are not found elsewhere too.
Yeah, and I don't guess we'll not know the answer to the question, were they there before the golf course was operating? Or is it only since the golf course went out of business? I don't know how yet.
Certainly some of them wouldn't have been there at the golf course there.
Yeah.
If we get more serious about this, it seems like it might be interesting to meet with the Land Trust and the Parks Association and get their ideas and encouragement, and that might be another group effort to, and there might be some more knowledge in that group about how to enact the Audubon's recommendations.
Right, and as I understand, the pollinator grants only pay for half of the plant material, so the other half would have to come from somebody else, whether it would be the town or another organization, so.
Right.
And then the big thing is, again, maintaining it. So, is it in the town budget to, even if it was implemented, to keep it going? And that is a big no.
I wouldn't suggest we do
it's
anything that
current.
would put a burden on the town to do it. I think we'd have to, anything we do would have to be, we'd have to have volunteer groups to maintain
Yeah,
it.
Well,
I think
right
you
now-
think of it as a sponsor organization.
You're right.
Some,
I don't know much about this, but the land that's right across from our house is a piece of land trust land, and they're getting involved with high school kids and trying to encourage that piece as a pollinator pathway, and they put down some cardboard to get rid of some of the invasive species. And so, if we get the technology of how to do this, it might be easier to enact it in a place like the Conservation Commission.
Right.
Yeah, because that high school program is unbelievable, and that's like really exciting.
Well,
that
that's
they're
people
doing.
power too, that
Yeah.
would be good.
So it's not going away. I mean, that's what we're moving towards is, these types of projects. And I know even at the middle school they're doing things, and now with Beecher it'll be sort of a feeder system of like, start with when they're really little, they're working on pollinator pathway projects, and
Okay, so
and then
we'll,
it just kind of morphs into AP environmental science classes, when they get to high school. I mean, these kids are
committed.
doing amazing things.
Okay, so that's an option, as well as,
There's an environmental group at the high school too.
It's an environmental science, it's an AP class, and that's who's doing the pond area across from your house.
Isn't there a club too? An environmental club?
Yeah, there's probably at least one, but there's just and the things that it does for your mental health. I mean, if you go walking in any of these spaces, or go spend time outside and you put your hands in the dirt, it is just the best therapy going. So I think that, you know, if we can get our young, our old, everybody doing it, you know, it's just, and it's a nice way to be in community. But, you know, I thought the report was really interesting as well, and, you know, I contacted the people that authored it, just to get a, you know, a little bit more information. And they did, like you had mentioned, recommend a forester. You know, there's only so much they can, you know, do beyond this. But, you know, it is an interesting situation we find ourselves in, having 155 acres or whatever, of succession, you know, growth. But I think it, you know, it's just a huge project. What I have in mind anyway for the pollinator pathway is like smaller bite-sized pieces, because I look
Yeah.
at the country club and I'm just like, I don't even know where you would begin with that.
Well, in some ways, it's doing it itself, which is the amazing thing, that nature's doing it itself, but a forester, so maybe that's something that we wanna write a grant for, to see if the forester could, you know, come give some guidance.
What was that gentleman that came? He's doing the forests on the Racebrook track, right?
He's just doing stuff with bittersweet.
Yeah,
Right, bittersweet.
Yeah.
it's a doctoral
But
study.
who knows, maybe he has fellow
Yeah,
students who
but
could
maybe there
also.
are other, I mean, cause it is a unique property, and while the town figures out what they're doing with that property, it wouldn't be, if we could get some free, you know, people to come and do some work there, that might be a good way to manage it, you know, until.
Well, I don't know that you get people to come do free work.
Well, meaning like if you were doing a graduate study or anything like that, you know, that there is,
Yeah.
you know, you're not gonna get
And
people mowing.
And if we got someone to study it, then where would we go with that?
Well, I think, you know, you know, if I have to think about like the plan for the town, my husband's on the EDC, I'm on, you know, the zoning board of appeals. I mean, we're very involved and aware of what's happening in the town, obviously. We know we need to solve a housing issue. There's a lot of different things that are coming down. 155 acres, it is the town's, but we know we need to do something with that land eventually. And I think that where we come in is that we could really take a look at this, take this report, go on a field trip, all of us, you know, we could kind of think about, because they make recommendations here, they don't assume that we're never gonna develop this land. Because, I mean, we just are not in that position to not, to do that, I don't think, as
So,
a town.
I don't think this is the discussion that we need to have right now, but I'd like to get back to the idea of, your idea of, getting someone who's a forester there, who could be, and Yale School of Forestry also is a place where, you know, they do have assignments, and
Yeah,
they've,
but I mean, I think if we could see where on the map, I mean, 155 acres is a lot. If there was an area, because of where we come in as the Conservation Commission, is to make recommendations that maybe there's a corridor or there is a forest that we want to sort of break off from the whole, and then, you know, that there's a section you wanna conserve, whether it's
well,
a
right now, I
connector,
wanna.
This is off
connection
the
to the
topic.
forest.
This
Yeah,
is
I
off
wanna
the topic.
conserve the whole thing, so
Yeah, this is
it's
totally
not
off the
something
topic,
that I'm
so
willing to,
why don't we get back on the agenda?
Okay. Well,
Okay.
I'm sorry, I
I
thought
mean, I think it is kind of the topic,
I
but-
thought this was the agenda, and this item,
Well, I
because it germinates out of the report, and so.
well, I think it, I don't know how to go about asking UNH or forestry school if there's someone who'd like to do some further investigation, but that seems like that's an option, and it would help us know how valuable that piece of land is environmentally, and that would be something that the town might wanna be interested in also.
Well, I guess I wanna say two things. one, I think there have been professionals that have come in and looked at the property and talked about how important it is environmental as a whole. Those studies, I think, have been done some years ago, and that those documents are available. And could they be updated? Yes, but I think essentially it's the same. I think what the Audubon study raised was land management. Now that you have it, you know,
Now that it's
what,
there.
what should be done with it. And so I do have a lead, let me call it that way, of getting someone in as a next step to perhaps flesh out the Audubon. So
Oh.
let me pursue that, which I haven't yet, and
Well, that sounds exciting.
and see if, you know, they would come in now. You know, that is not a professional forester. You get a professional forester, then that's a paid engagement, and you're gonna pay money for that, but this would be, you know, at least the next level of detail perhaps. And I think what.
Do you know who the person was that led the tour last week?
Andrea Urbano,
No, I mean,
Was
in
one
terms
of
of, was she one of the people that did it?
well, the write-up on the trails they mentioned, didn't mention her. So I make an assumption, but it mentioned a position. And so, and said the person was local, so
Okay.
Andrea fits that description, so no, it's an assumption on my part, not a definite, but I made the assumption because it was the position. So, and it was also led by, you said led by, and it wasn't led by Andrea. It was led by Brian Pine of Woodbridge Land Trust and Chris Dickerson, that's who it said would lead it. And then Andrea was gonna be there as well as a local birder.
Right, that's
What
the thing I was getting at is maybe the local birder person maybe could give us some suggestions if we were to pursue a pollinator pathway, where would be a good place to start? Because I mean, I think Joy has a point, it's 155 acres, so we have to start somewhere if we were to do it. Can't do everything at once, so where would be the right place to start?
And I think we would have to identify sort of the right place for the land management. 158, you're not gonna do the whole thing. And a lot of it's, so we will wanna choose carefully what could be managed, what can you take on, what could the town take on?
And the
Because the
good
town's
news-
gonna have to pay for it.
And right now,
Yeah.
it is a pollinator pathway,
Yeah.
literally, like, because of a lot of the succession and the low
Right.
growth and milkweed spread and, you know, a lot of sadly invasive species too, but it is,
Yeah.
the pollinators are doing fine there, you know.
Yeah,
Very
and
well.
maybe, you know, this person can do this, maybe this is a field meeting for this group, just to get a look through their eyes.
This is a good time of year to do it the next few months.
Yeah, absolutely,
Yeah.
that's a good idea.
Yeah, okay, good. So we'll move on from that topic. I think I'm gonna take a,
What are the next steps for this? Just to hold for now, or what are the next steps for this?
the next step is I'm going to see if I can run down my lead and identify a person who would flesh out some of the recommendations in the Audubon study
Okay.
and see what, you know, and I think this would be
That sounds like a good next step.
a gratis engagement, and so we'd have that information, and then we'd have to think, you know, what we would wanna do with it and how to take it forward.
Yeah, I mean, I just don't think I'm gonna just say it, so it's on record, I don't think it's feasible that you're gonna conserve 155 acres, but I think that if we could really take a look at it as a group, and
Mhm.
just say, okay, but this for sure, you know, and especially if you're gonna have somebody make recommendations, like the Audubon's had their say, whoever this person is that you're gonna bring in, that we could really look at what would be the section that we would wanna make sure that it was conserved
Yeah.
and preserved.
You do realize this is the Conservation Commission, right?
It doesn't mean though that we
All right.
only use land or, you know, it's, I mean, we're also in our charter, and you can read the charter, we're also supposed to make recommendations when things are developed in town of how we can, you know, do that and keep certain areas. We have to, there's only so much land, right? We have to figure out a way to get all the things done. And I do believe that as a conservation commission, it isn't about conserving every piece of land for wildlife only. This was a polluted
So-
country club, you know, like, let's, you know.
Tell you honestly, Joy, you keep bringing this up in every meeting. When we're talking about a different subject, you keep throwing this topic out. It's like, it's getting old, frankly.
Okay,
So why don't we stay on the agenda?
well, we were talking about the Audubon Society and this assessment for this property. So I'm sorry if you think
Okay.
that, but.
Well, I think we were at the end of the topic. We have the next step, as Val asked me to summarize, so I'll do that.
Yeah, can I just interject one thing?
Yeah.
During our meetings, there was one man, I believe it was last year, when we were talking, and he did speak. I forgot who he was, but it should be in some of our meetings. And he did speak about the ecosystem there and all of the. Do you remember?
I do.
He was a doc. He had a doctorate in something.
Okay, I was thinking dentist,
Oh.
but,
Michael Broderick,
right, there we go, thank you. Say a doctor or
Good
a
job.
dentist?
he's a doctor, he's a veterinarian doctor.
Veterinary, okay.
Yeah.
He's also, his background, I think he's got an advanced degree in environmental studies too.
Yeah.
He might be a good person to start.
I think that's a
with.
good idea.
Yeah.
Okay, next, we're going to transition to the, talking about the, let me see, I rewrote it, oh, no wonder, excuse me. It's an old agenda, last month's, and the item I was looking for wasn't on there, and it was last month's. But we're gonna transition to the reasons to include a parcel on the properties worthy of preservation. Before I do that, I'm gonna pass out minutes from the last meeting. These, we won't vote on these tonight, but Kathy was good enough to make copies for us, so I'll just pass those out quickly. And we'll get ready to go to the next topic.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Two copies of this. So this is that first page.
Thank you.
Two copies. gonna vote on those tonight, so ask you to finish your reading when you get home. The, up on the screen, I just put, the steps that we've been on. We're really resurrecting this from a conversation we had to suspend 3 or 4 months ago. It seems we stopped the conversation, but we had been going through the previous open space plans and looking at the properties worthy of preservation and just bringing those up to date. That was one of the steps. We had, of course, done the greenway first, and out of the greenway we identified some properties that were worthy of acquisition or preservation. So we'll extract those. Those are the ones that are privately owned, but the greenway goes through them. So those would be important, we said. And the next step, we were going to review the PA 490 list to see whether properties there were worthy of inclusion. Now, the reason to use the PA 490 is...
Remind me what the PA 490 is?
Yeah, good, I'm glad you asked. Because I should have thought to remind everybody. PA 490 is a public act. 490 is a Connecticut public act, and it makes available the ability for municipalities to offer some
Oh, this is
tax
muni-
benefits for people who
Right.
willingly put their properties aside for preservation. It can be farmland properties, forest properties,
Right.
or open space
Okay,
properties.
I remember now.
Basically it allows the assessor to assess the property for less, so
At a
that
different rate.
Got it.
Yeah.
discourages people from having, or just reduces the incentive for somebody to want to develop the property.
And
Right.
we're reviewing it for deletions because some of them are no longer appropriate?
Well, no, we have no control over the list.
Right.
But as we...
Oh, I see.
we're-
See who
we're
took themselves
faced-
off it.
We're faced with saying, well, which properties should be open space? Should we try to preserve? Should we try to acquire? And there's a lot of properties. So the thought here is that these are properties that people have self-identified,
Got it.
right? So now, you'll see a note later on, I don't think the bulk of these should make our list, but I think it's a good source to go through. So we'll go through, and then, we'll, out of thin air, we'll think about what else is in town. We'll look at some maps, perhaps, and say what else should be on our list, and then we'll combine it down and we move towards the end. But before we get there, I thought tonight we would start to brainstorm why, as we go through the PA 90 list, or any other property in town, so why should it be on our list? What
Yeah.
are the basis we're gonna put on a list? We should have a good reason. So we'll go through that. And if it helps, up at the top, maybe for Joy, because she wasn't here, but that's kind of a reminder for everybody. Just, I tried to summarize why we're doing this.
But-
But
Remind me, when Jason was still involved, you did a whole thing where we decided a whole graph of
Well,
what,
yeah, that was a rating system.
yeah, doesn't that sort of do this?
It is, a lot of those factors that you rated are what's on the list of criteria we should consider, yes. So
So
there's
do
a
you
lot of
have-
similarity, no numbers though. And actually, that's a good segue because my
So let me just tell everyone, when Jason was the chairman, and you came up with a way to rank properties as to what would be criteria if something came up for sale, why we might choose it to buy it.
Yeah, I would just rephrase the history a little bit. There had been a previous ranking system. Jason was starting to redevelop that. I sort of helped him, took it and got it in a shape that we talked about it at the commission meetings. So I inherited it and sort of tried to get it finished for him.
So does that suffice for what we're talking about now?
It's a good source of the type of criteria, but my comment was gonna be, this is not a perfect science. We're not, I don't wanna go through all these properties and try to rank them all, put numbers on them like this calls to be done. I think it's a.
Well, I just made a list of
Think
things.
seriously about the properties and, does it fit the basic criteria? And it's a judgment call, I think, as what we put on, what we don't.
Well, can I share? I wrote some things when you just started saying this of things that I think are criteria. Do you want to hear
Great.
them?
Do you
I think the
want-
first one is if
No.
it's available. I think being pragmatic is also, if it's possible to buy it, that is the thing. But I think where there's a variety of ecosystems, where there's varied topography or varied water and, meadow and, where it has more than one ecosystem would make it more attractive. If it's in if it's adjacent to other protected land, so it potentiates an already existing piece of property,
Mhm.
its innate beauty. If it has special features like a rock outcropping or a soil type or more wetlands or things like that. If it's particularly visible in the town, if it would be developed so that it would destroy a lot of the feeling of how the town looks, I think that would.
I think that's
Be a
an important
criteria?
criteria.
And I guess, so if we had a forester who also talked to us about the type of habitats and stuff, who we could use as a consultant, that would also be good if there were some lands that we were considering of how, is it all mugwort or does it have, some great old trees, or does it have a,
So you're really saying it's valuable,
ecosystem?
well, yeah, is valuable ecosystem, I guess, so, okay, so almost, you had said ecosystem before.
Yeah.
um,
So those are the things that come to mind.
all right, good.
I'm sure there's many others.
While
Tim,
you're on-
could you circulate what the prior list was? It might jog memories in terms of, one way we could look at it is,
Yeah,
reprioritizing that list.
yeah, okay, hold that thought 1 second. While you're on a roll, are there any reasons you can think of property shouldn't be included?
If it's already been, my idea is to include as much property as possible, but if it's already been disturbed, or if there's a toxic,
Polluted.
yeah, if it's, that might be a reason to preserve it too, because it has a lot of land and it might be nice to clean it up.
Yeah.
But, I think if it just had 2 houses torn down and it's, just not gonna be an ecosystem that is very viable.
Right,
Or if it was on our prior list and it's already been developed.
Yeah.
okay.
Or if it's right in between two huge develop, I don't know, maybe that is a good reason.
So, I'm gonna pass out, I didn't want, and very happy that you jotted those things down. But I took
You also
the
jotted some
previous
things
list
down. Uh-huh.
and I seeded something for us to brainstorm on. So I'll pass that out now. Add yours. Just that's that page.
So those first 2 are ones that I agree with: ecosystem preservation, forest woodland preservation, historic farm. I like all those.
Can get recorded.
That's good.
This is good.
I think the one
sites.
that isn't there is if there's multiple ecosystems.
Okay, so let me, and I was gonna ask everybody if everybody has a pen. Anybody not have a pen? As we identify excuse me, as we identify additions to the list, if you can jot them down for yourself, so you just have it. So I heard,
Well, availability.
I'm sorry, Sharon.
The one I want to add is that it's available to be purchased is a major criteria.
Which is transitory, right? That's not, that's,
That could prioritize the list.
yeah, I mean, that's something you take action on right away. If it's available, then you ask these questions, but,
Right.
Tim, I would like to question about the word preservation. If we are not acquiring it, can we still assist a homeowner with this? With perhaps developing or making their land more
well, you can work with willing homeowner to get a conservation easement on the property.
okay.
And that's one way that can be done.
And then they would also get the tax advantages? I think so.
Well, no, I don't think a conservation easement necessarily gives them a tax advantage.
It would
If
do,
they apply for PA,
No, if they applied for this particular,
I think it might,
program.
because
Let- let's-
The farm, the forest.
if you weren't able to
Let's-
develop it, it would reduce its marketability, which
It-
would make
yeah.
it less
So-
valuable.
so we have two lists we've talked about, Pal.
yeah,
We're not, the PA 490 list, which is the way someone can apply for the different tax structure for farmland, forest land, or open space. We're not gonna talk about that list anymore tonight. We're putting that aside. The list we're getting ready to work on is the list of that we as a commission for our open space plan, we want to identify a list of properties worthy of acquisition or preservation. So
okay.
tonight we're just saying, well, what kind of properties are we gonna put in there? What should we be thinking about as we look at each property address and say, well, should that go on this list or not? And we're saying these are some of the criteria we should be thinking about. And, you know, I put a little footnote down the bottom so you can see it on your screen. I mean, to me, if for any of these criteria, it should be what words did I end up using? Something of substance, compelling, or significant nature. There's a little puddle of wetlands, that's not wetlands, it's gotta be significant.
Well, it is wetlands.
What's significant? Well, that's where the judgment call.
The one that isn't there that Paul also agreed on is that it's a focal piece of property in the town that, affects its characteristic.
Okay, so, these kind of smooth enough that word. Focal point of community?
So I was thinking, the thing that came to mind when you said that, and I had thought of it earlier too, is the Fellows Farms. That property is,
Sets a tone for the.
it sets a tone for the whole center of the town. And it's open space and it's directly across the street from the Fitzgerald property, which is not protected either. It'd be nice if, I guess if the plan was for them to continue to farm that property, it might be something we could pursue a conservation easement on too. Not necessarily buy it, but just get a conservation easement
right.
so it's not developed.
Right, and that exists in some of the properties in the center of town, I think. Okay, what else?
Well, I don't think the thing that I said where there's two ecosystems, or more than one ecosystem, like a pond and a hill or a, you know, or,
Not covered under ecosystem preservation, and then with the
well,
foot-
maybe a
footnote-
highlight, especially if there's variety, if there's,
Okay.
you know,
Mhm.
because I think biological systems are more, like if there's wetlands and a forest and a field, that all has
A
more.
meadow and a pond or
Yeah.
something, right?
Right.
Okay.
Oh, a
So-
waterfall too.
Just out of curiosity, like, are the properties I have in mind, are they preserved? So, for instance, you know, the center of town, the whole property of the, cornfield and is that conserved?
The Fitzgerald property
Yeah,
It's
No.
not-
contains
This
the
is old,
cornfields, the walking track, the community gardens, the dog.
but there is
Walk
wetlands
and the
there,
fire.
there's
Yeah.
forests surrounding it with the trail system,
Yep.
is that, so that's not even conserved?
No.
That is not preserved.
there, it's actively not being conserved by the people.
So wouldn't that be on the top of our list?
Well, we know that the politics is such that people are very interested in not doing that, who have, so it is on the top of our list, but I don't think
Yeah.
we feel like we can get very far with it.
So
There
can
are-
you just explain to me, I'm very confused then about what is conserved, when I thought
Well,
there were
the-
Much,
areas in
much-
town that were
Much
conserved.
less than you expect.
Really?
well, there is.
And even when the town puts a conservation easement on something, they
They
can
can
take it
remove it?
off. It has happened, yes.
Okay. Like, for instance, when, or what?
These are getting into political hotspots, but the firehouse.
Okay. So that, the firehouse,
firehouse
the
is-
new one, I mean, the old one is a historic one, that, or how they got to build the firehouse?
It's, how they got to build the firehouse, I'm not sure that, well, that Fitzgerald, it was part of the Fitzgerald property, which is not conserved, so that's how they got to build it there. But then the Conservation Commission created an easement for a portion of it that they then utilized, that then the town decided the town sided with the firemen to remove the conservation easement because they wanted it as the place where they could have a fire pit. So it made it clear to me that conservation easements can be, from what I understand, and maybe I'm misremembering, can be altered if the Board of Selectmen chooses to alter it.
Before my time,
Okay, well, that's just troubling, because then our work here,
that,
we're,
that would be troubling if it was true.
yeah,
Because conservation easements, in my knowledge, are
Are-
protected by Connecticut law.
okay,
Um,
that's what
it-
my understanding
A
was.
true easement that's written into a deed.
Okay.
And,
Uh,
and maybe I'm
One thing.
misremembering, though there was a lot that went on with it.
So there are different levels of protection of property in town. There's water company property, there's property that's owned by the town, and then there's property that actually do have conservation easements on it. And so there are different levels of protection, and a lot of people just assume that property like the Fitzgerald property is protected because the town owns it, which is not the case.
Okay,
But when the land trust owns it, or the park department owns it, it's more, I mean, land trust, that's their whole goal, is to just preserve land. So
Right.
once they own it, then it is very, very likely to stay preserved.
It's got
Or
a
once
high
they have
level
the
of
easement.
protection to it.
well, I will just say, like, so it's troubling too, even in the cases of the land trust. I know there's a huge court case you probably have seen in the news up in Bethel right now, where the extension office for Yukon, which runs, you know, the Master Gardener program, 4-H, healthy food living or something like that, and it's been there forever. Somehow it got kicked out of its land trust and somehow changed hands, all kind of under the cover of darkness during
Well,
COVID.
that's true, that can happen.
And now they're being evicted. And it's just like unheard of. And it's so that, some developer probably can like develop the land, but it's been UConn's extension office for Fairfield County, of all places, for like 100 years. And it's,
Yeah.
they're duking it out left and right to there's been cease and desists, and I'm honestly not sure how it's gonna pan out.
Well,
It's
I mean,
really,
it's all
you
a
would
good
think the
question
sign
of how
would
to
be,
preserve land. It gets to be tricky because it gets valuable and people want to use it.
right,
So that's our job, is to help do the best we can to help it be preserved. That's my feeling about our job.
So, yeah, I'm not familiar with that case, but, so, I'm gonna refer back to the Greenway plan. Joy, maybe you have a copy of it, or up on the site, or I'll send you out the extract.
I have that.
Because, and two things about that. One, immediately related to what we were just saying about properties. We spent a lot of time, as we prepared that, to itemize every piece of property through which the Greenway passed and the level of protection on it. So that we realized that there were some properties that we thought were protected that are not protected. And so you'll see that in the
Which
plan.
are things that we might want to purchase if they became available, in
Right.
hopes that what we would do would solidify their protection, but it is a little bit ambiguous.
And
how
again,
that we
why
do that.
they're on this list, the property worthy of acquisition or preservation, because they're valuable open space to the
So-
Greenway.
So how
And
is it dealt
I'm
with on the
noticing-
Connecticut Greenway? Does that become eminent domain? Is that, how come it becomes, I guess, a little bit more, is our Greenway isn't connected to the Greenway, right? But,
Yeah,
or,
we're part of it.
Connecticut has a Greenways program that allows municipalities to identify greenways, and there are some regional greenways. There are greenways that cross town boundaries, I guess I should say. The West River Greenway crosses 5 communities, and the state has recognized that. Woodbridge bought into that, said we're good with being part of that regional greenway. So we've got both the regional one and our local one. There is no Connecticut Greenway per se. It's the assembled municipal greenways that form sort of, just these, it's like the pollinator pathways. There's no one pollinator pathway in Woodbridge. There's in different places, so make it equivalent to that. The Greenway, before we move on, the other item in the Greenway plan, near the front, there's a section that will explain the different levels of protection. And Paul was right on in what he was describing. And I would just elaborate on one point about municipal protection. On municipal protections, there are 2 levels. There's municipal protected and municipal managed, that you'll see there. Municipal protected meaning it's a piece of land that has been designated as open space, and there's some legal, either it's in the deed or it's been acquired through a fund, a grant from the state or the federal government. That it's called grants and aid, and so grants and aid gives it one level of protection. Being in a deed is different, and so you'll see those defined in the Greenway plan, but the descriptions are there. And as Paul was talking about the water company, there'll be definitions, and those protections rank from most protected to least protected. A municipal managed piece of property is one of the least protected, because at any time the municipality, while it's being used for one purpose, could change its mind and use it for another purpose, or go through a proper process and sell the land. So I think
So,
you'll get the
in
answer to
the
your question as
interest-
you look through that.
Tim, in the interest of time, how much longer are we gonna spend on this?
Well,
What's the conclusion
I-
you wanna come to?
Well, the conclusion is, I wanna, give people a chance to brainstorm on it. If you think that first part of that list is good, but I don't want to cut that off if other people's have ideas, but I think I heard that some comments that it was people thought it was a pretty complete list.
But may I add, Tim,
Yes.
what about brooks and streams or waterfalls?
Yeah. Wetlands, he's got wetlands on there,
That would include all of that would be all
Yeah.
wetlands? Okay.
that's part of
Yeah,
wetlands.
and I
thought it
think
was just-
also ecosystems, repairing
Yeah.
ecosystems, I think would be covered in. So the other part of this is, are there reasons not to include a parcel? And I think I heard you say the same thing, Sharon.
Mm-hmm.
There's surrounded by housing, that's single, and this had PA 490 in mind when I said single-family home with minimal excess acreage, unbuildable parcels. And if it's unbuildable, it's not gonna be developed,
We already got it without having to do
Yeah.
anything.
and we'll find some of those.
I like
There are
those.
some of those around.
Yeah. And just as a, well, now with the courts that have just changed the EPA ruling, but previously the Environmental Protection Agency had a lot of ideas about wetlands, and so it was pretty undevelopable, and so that was already a reason people gave the land away, and also it's a reason we might want it because we could get it for less and also add other pieces that aren't exactly wetlands but are within the buffer zone in areas. So that makes it attractive to us, but it also makes it almost possibly unnecessary if it's already being protected by state and federal law to buy it. You know, we don't have to buy it if it's already can't be developed.
Okay, so what I'd like to do in the next meeting is have a work session and go through the PA 490 list. There are 66 of them that
Okay.
we need to go through. So I thought it might,
66 properties?
yeah.
That are
And then-
either
Then there's
farm
another
or-
dozen, I'll say, utility properties, which we can deal with sort of as a separate bunch.
Like the high tension areas, you mean?
Yeah.
Okay.
Um, So I have a thought that a way to expedite it next time, 66 is a lot to come in fresh without ever having looked at them. And I'm not gonna ask everybody to look at 66 properties, I think that's daunting too. But I was hoping we could divide them up.
Wait, I have an idea before you go on. I think we should do a little bit of it first so that we're informed enough so that when we look them up, we can be more efficient. So can we do that the next meeting?
If you could send the list out ahead of time, that would be good.
Well, I
Take a look
intended
at
to give you the list tonight.
Oh, good, okay.
What I want to suggest is that we divide the list up. And each of you take 11 properties. I have them sorted by street. So some of the same properties up here on the same street. And just be the kind of the facilitator next time. But, and with the expectation that you would have jumped in your car and driven past the property, take a look at it, know whether, you know, a lot of houses around. And you can do that with the town GIS system as well. But, you know, you probably do it in your car.
It's a good idea, we'll be more efficient. Good.
Yeah, you know, depending on what you're more comfortable with. Maybe both. I mean, you know, sometimes it helps to get there if you don't know the neighborhood. On the back of that piece of paper, I put the, you know, what we're gonna do next time. And these were my thoughts about that activity. I'll give you a minute to read that. And you know, have you each make for 11 of the properties a first pass, and just say, yeah, yes or no. Again, with the assumption that most should not go. And the we're looking for the ones to add, not the ones to exclude, is another way to say it. But if you think a property should be on our list to preserve, if you would require, then just note down the reason or reasons, and then everybody does that beforehand, then we can go through them, I think, more quickly next time. If you've all
Does the
done-
list just have street names or street numbers rather, or does it say how much land is on the, how much land is involved?
I will give you the list. No, actually, I was gonna make you pick your 11 first before I gave you the list. I just made a mistake.
But I
No
feel,
cherry picking. This is a little small here, but I will send it electronically to you. I wanted to give it to you here.
Can I volunteer to do 1 to 11?
For what reason?
No reason, I just saw Acorn Hill Road, that's not far from where I'm at. Amity's a little harder to do because you're driving by it, but the Sorensen Farm, you and I talked about that as
Yeah.
like one of the, how is it that they're,
Everybody okay if Troy takes it first?
fine.
Sure.
So, if you tell me which ones you wanna take, and we'll let the four of you pick.
I'll
them.
take the
I'll assign
second.
the rest to, Barbara and Diana.
I'll take the second 11.
Okay. And you see where the numbers are, right? There's, item number, yeah. Oh, which ones you want?
I'm happy to take the third 11, that's fine,
Okay.
unless Val wants it.
Val, you have,
No, you can take it.
Okay,
All yours.
so,
And then Barbara should take the next, cause isn't that her address on there?
Yeah.
Northrop Road?
Yeah.
Yeah, that could be her. Yeah, that is her. Smith et
So
al.
would that be the next 11, would that be her, 45, 33, and 44?
okay, we'll give her that.
I actually wanted to take the last, I wanted to take Seymour Road,
Sure.
the last 11, so it would be 50, 56, 56, 55,
Okay. How come
55 to 66.
Why? Oh, Barbara, that's right. I knew there were two people not here. I typed Barbara in. Only
And
one left.
Diane.
Okay.
Okay,
Give
so
Diana
can we
that
keep
other one.
moving? Do we have everyone divided up?
We
Do you have-
Let me save that. And, any questions or concerns about the verbiage up above? I mean, those are just my thoughts on
so
what the, homework is, I guess.
on your homework on number 1, so the task is to find the few that should be included, but the assumption is none will be?
Yeah, I'm just trying to make a point. Unlike the last list where
Well, let's just do it and
these
then
were all,
decide.
yeah, they were all in the previous list of properties worthy of preservation. We were seeing which ones we could get rid of because they had been built on already.
Okay.
This list is the opposite. None of these, well, quote unquote, none of these are on the list of properties worthy of preservation. And I don't think very many will end up on. I just want to establish a bias. I want to ask you to be rigorous, to have really good reasons, substantial reasons that'll justify adding it to the list. That's all.
Okay.
I think it makes a lot of
Let's move
sense
on.
to proactively approach property owners and offer them conservation easements on the property.
Well, we have to have money to do that. So we have to establish that we have the money to do that before we do it.
Yeah, I'm just talking about, theoretically. I think it makes a lot of sense for the town economically to do something like that as opposed to have large parcels of land developed for residential
Yeah.
use. I mean, just the economics make sense.
How
And
does
that
this
is what
help
the
the
land
town?
trust has been doing.
Philosophical discussion, it can be.
Yeah.
It helps the town because more housing creates more
Expense.
expense to the
So
town.
residential housing costs more to communities than they provide in tax revenue.
Okay.
So like, for instance, the Sorensen farm, I could understand going and saying, you know, I think it's a historic farm, right? Multiple generations. You know, that it's, I'm just looking because that's on my list. That maybe we want to preserve some of our farms
Yeah.
in town, since that's a,
And-
That's been a thrust in town.
Yes.
Mhm.
So there'll be
But
some that will be
that-
included, so I don't
So-
think.
This is the discussion we'll have next time. I mean, you put down your feeling on it based upon those criteria, and we're not gonna, we're gonna discuss them all.
Okay, I need to
All right.
go in just a few minutes. So
I just have
before
one
we
question
move on.
Go ahead.
before we adjourn. In terms of getting grants and they're directed toward, Woodbridge, who would the contact person be? And I think we need to continue to monitor, because I think some grants or the notice of grants may be coming out directed towards Woodbridge. How can we access that information? What's the conduit for us to be able to understand and see that those notices of grants came out? Because I think those grants did come out and some towns were able to obtain them. So how would we be
I'm
able
sure
to access
the-
that information?
I'm sure,
Tony.
I would assume Karen Crosby would get those notices. Betsy Yago used to take care of most of the grants in town. Karen is her successor, would be Karen Crosby.
There was a big press conference a few weeks ago where the governor announced,
He-
granting-
The awarding of the grants.
awarding grants for essentially greenway spaces in mostly Fairfield County, I think it was.
But I think there should be something more deliberate, in my opinion. We
Oh, I think
rather
you're
than
right.
assuming that someone's going to do this, we're the conservation committee. We should have some kind of connection with whoever is getting the notice so that we can be prepared and apply for these grants.
I'm
sorry.
I'm gonna take that as, we have a little section here for member comments, so.
Okay, yeah.
Take that, that's a good comment. I don't wanna start a new.
It's a good idea.
It's not on the agenda for tonight. We can-
Right.
we
But I
wanna
think
put a
that's-
segment on to, revisit that. We've done it in the past, but let's revisit it.
Well, or let's
Yeah.
just talk to Karen Crosby and see if she'll inform us about grants.
Yes, somebody
I mean,
from
why do we have
also
to make
here,
it,
we can
can
talk,
you do
we
that,
can-
Tim?
But I think they're coming
I can.
in, and we need to make sure that we're aware of them when they come in, so that we're prepared, because rather
Okay,
than.
I'll
Okay.
ask her if she gets
Okay.
notices. Okay,
Okay.
we're gonna skip the 1932 Litchfield Turnpike, as that was a Barbara item. She's not here to
Okay,
talk sufficiently about it. So we talked about both historical and tree preservation. We have that noted. I need to follow up Barbara. We're trying to get the historical society kicked off. They've identified people. Follow up with Barbara. My couple of updates. Andy Danzig has started getting the equipment funded with money. He's very happy. So that's a good thing. 124 Seymour Road
Hmm.
is back out of foreclosure court, and the auction is, I believe it's July 1st. That piece of property, which is a piece of property on the Greenway Trail, and it looks like it may, we thought there was protection on it, and when we did the research for the Greenway plan, it wasn't on, no protection. So it's smack in the middle of the trail, and we're at jeopardy there.
and so
Is it a-
there's no interest in the town to put in any money.
No, when that came up before the town, they said, are they asking for money? And it was very clear that there's no desire to put in.
Is it a foreclosure auction? Is that
We
what
did
it?
not, we did not
Yeah.
formally ask the town
Oh, yeah, from my-
to. Sorry, Paul.
Was it a foreclosure auction? Is that the
Yes.
kind of auction it is? Okay.
And you don't know how much that's for, or-
I could look at
Actually, I have to say no. I know, I did know, but I don't currently
It's like
remember.
480 or somewhere in that
What the
number range.
the number was where it needs to cover the debts, so I'm sure they'll start the auction there. And I don't remember, I think you're close.
Yeah, I think they were asking five,
Yeah, there was a
524 or
difference
something,
between
and
the sales and the debt.
yeah, it was a little bit higher.
Continues to be on the market.
Yeah.
I think that, those were my two comments. Anybody, any other?
Just a question on the theater property that we voted on a couple months ago now, I guess. I guess the Board of Selectmen decided to exercise the right of first refusal. Has that happened? Has there been any more discussion about putting a conservation easement on that property like we recommended? Those are my two questions.
I happened to look at that property today in the town GIS system, and it's still listed with the state of Connecticut, so nothing legally has happened to it, but it is, the Board of Selectmen are going through the process, so I expect that that's.
but the question Paul's really asking is, do we have a conservation easement
Well,
on that piece of
that was the
property?
second question, that there was, that question was not brought up during the meeting. It was in our letter, but they did not discuss that during the meeting.
I think they talked about it a little bit. They said there was, should we have a conservation easement on it or not? And they kind of just brushed over that part of it
There was
and
no
just said,
discussion
we're just
at
going to
the
buy it.
meeting.
It's going to cost $1,500 to buy it. Where's the money going to come from? And our recommendation was to use some of the money we had set aside so it wouldn't impact taxpayers, which seems to
Right.
be,
But only if there's a conservation easement. We're not gonna buy it if there's no
well,
conservation
if I
easement.
think the other thing they talked about is if they use the funds from the Conservation Commission, it would probably necessitate a conservation easement on the property. The other thing is it's wetlands property too, so it's probably unbuildable, so it makes another reason to put a conservation easement on it because, and use those funds so it doesn't impact taxpayers. So they didn't discuss it in depth, but I think if they spent a couple minutes on it, or maybe if we sent a memo and asked them to revisit that, it would make sense to do it that way.
They were, excuse me, they were planning to revisit whether the funds would come out of the open space fund.
Mm-hmm.
I think what you're referring to at the next meeting. There's research going to be done whether using the open space fund would in effect put any restrictions on the property.
But I think we should say that our offer to use open space funds is only if there is a conservation easement. They can't use those funds without our guidance, can they? I mean, do we have like no power?
Well, those are not our funds. It's the
It's
town's
for
funds that
conservation though.
yeah,
It's
it's
specifically for conservation.
designated as an open space fund. The source of the money has to be tracked back because
Probably
if it
came from state
from
grants or something like that.
If it came from a grant that has restriction in it, then that can only be used for open space to the land.
So-
I think
Got
that's
it.
what's being researched.
So my only
And
point,
our, just one thing, Paul, we wrote the letter and we said, we recommend you use those funds. We didn't put a restriction on it,
We should have written it in such a way that we did though.
so
we
we
could amend it.
recommended using that land, those funds and also having a conservation easement on it. I don't think the memo specifically said that you can only
Had to
use
be a
that.
stipulation.
Yeah.
Tied together.
But I
Well, we
think
could
it would
revote
make
right
sense,
now.
especially considering the property is wetlands and probably could never be developed anyway, so why wouldn't we use those funds and not impact taxpayers? And it just seems to make it a lot neater. There's no reason to use taxpayer funds if property can never be developed, so why don't you use something that's gonna put a conservation easement on it, because it can never be developed anyway, so it's, I mean, it doesn't make sense to do any other way, at least from my perspective.
Any other comments before we
Well,
close?
Do you think it makes any sense to now vote and say that the conservation easement, one of the stipulations of using the open space, our recommendation is based on the fact that it will be a conservation easement on that property?
I think the horse is out of the barn on that one, because we already sent the letter.
So-
And in effect, Chairman, it's not, they're gonna, in terms of, well, I think they would want us, confer with us about using the money, but we've told them you can use the money, so sort of, it's after the fact, to put
Yeah.
the stipulation on it, I think. is-
Okay, I
There's
think
already
that's right.
inherent
But I
rights
think
for
we should have,
ownership anyway.
it's a learning for ourselves in the future that we should.
Well, we could make a motion and say, we'd like to make a motion to recommend to the Board of Selectmen that they use those funds for the following reason: the land is wetlands and it couldn't be developed anyway, and by using those funds, it had no impact to Woodbridge taxpayers because it's funds that's already set aside from prior state grants. Something along those lines.
Having talked to Tony Genovese about the open space fund and the monies that are in it, I am pretty sure, 95% sure, that those monies have come from Connecticut grants, and that if it was used, it'd be a restriction on the property.
Okay, well, that's
I- you
clarification,
know,
that's,
we were looking at the grants, and he said these monies are left over from the grants. Now, was there another source at some time that he can track back? Maybe, but then you know, money is fungible, so which money is it? But I'm
Okay.
pretty sure, I think that's why it came up, that they didn't immediately say,
use that money.
use that money, because
They want to have control over
flexibility,
it.
as we talked about, when we talked about the Fitzgerald property, is a desirable position for the town to have over their property.
Yeah, but if it's wetlands and it can never be developed,
Well, the
why
wetland-
would
That's-
you?
But wetlands laws are changing, unfortunately, so
Yeah.
that's not,
Oh.
so, just good. So, can we make a motion to adjourn?
If no one else has any comments, I would welcome a motion to adjourn.
I so,
second it.
And therefore, we are adjourned. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.